Why we trust fear more than we trust love, the psychological trap of power. You've been lied to since you were a child. Lied to by fairy tales, by movies, by politicians, even by your own hopes. The lie? That love conquers all. That being kind wins in the end. That if you treat people well, they will treat you the same. But deep down, you've seen the cracks. You've noticed that the most feared people often rise faster than the most loved. That those who impose themselves, those who intimidate, manipulate, and even punish tend to hold power longer than those who try to be liked. And that's where Machiavelli steps in, like a cold wind of truth slicing through the fog of illusions. In The Prince, he asks the question most people are too afraid to ask: is it better to be loved or feared? And without hesitation, he answers, fear wins.
Click subscribe to this channel to get more profound insights.
No, he's not advocating cruelty for the sake of it. He's not saying love isn't valuable. But he's revealing something much darker, much more uncomfortable. Love is conditional. Fear is reliable. People love you based on who they think you are, but they fear you for what they know you can do. Love depends on loyalty, which fades. Fear depends on consequences, which don't. And if you've ever been betrayed by someone who once said they loved you, you already know this truth in your bones. That's why Machiavelli says a ruler should strive to be feared without being hated, because hatred leads to rebellion. But fear calculated, stable fear keeps people in line. It creates order, and order, in his view, is the foundation of power. Now, you might be thinking, but that's not how I want to live. I want to lead with compassion. I want to build trust. And that's valid. But here's the philosophical trap. What happens when your kindness is seen as weakness? What happens when your trust is used against you? Machiavelli isn't writing about morality. He's writing about reality. And the reality is harsh. People are unpredictable. They are self-interested. They will act honorably when it suits them and abandon honor when it doesn't. So ask yourself, are you building your life, your leadership, your relationships on what people should be, or on what they actually are? Because that gap, that is where fear walks in and takes the throne. Let's look at this psychologically. Fear activates survival. It bypasses logic, emotion, even identity. When you fear someone, you obey them almost instinctively. It's not a choice, it's a reflex. Love, on the other hand, is fragile. It requires maintenance. It can dissolve in confusion, disappointment, or time. And here's the paradox: we want to be loved, but we listen to those we fear. Think about your own life. Whose opinion do you really care about? The one who loves you unconditionally, or the one who could destroy your reputation, your job, your sense of peace? That's not a moral failure. That's a human truth. And Machiavelli didn't invent it, he just exposed it. So why does fear win? Because fear is simple. Fear is primal. Fear is predictable. Love, for all its beauty, is chaotic. It fluctuates. It depends on emotion, memory, circumstance. Fear, on the other hand, is rooted in pain avoidance. It's a straight line between action and reaction. If you've ever seen how a child reacts to a strict parent versus a gentle one, you've seen this philosophy in motion. The strict parent may not be loved in the moment, but they are obeyed. And in Machiavelli's view, especially in leadership, obedience matters more than affection. Because affection doesn't stop a crisis, Affection doesn't prevent betrayal, but fear does, or at least can. This idea is more relevant today than ever. We live in a world where influence is currency, where leaders are judged not just by what they say, but by the aura they create. And here's the secret: people follow strength. Not just physical strength, but psychological strength. The ability to impose boundaries, to endure rejection, to say no without apology. These are traits we respect, even when we don't admit it. And often, they are rooted in fear not of violence, but of consequence. You can love someone and still dismiss them. But when you fear someone, you hesitate. You calculate, you adjust, and in that moment, they hold power over you. But here's where we need to be careful. Machiavelli isn't saying be cruel. He's saying be strategic. He's not calling for tyranny, he's calling for clarity. Because if you lead with only love, you risk being used. If you lead with only fear, you risk being overthrown. But if you balance both, if you are loved when possible and feared when necessary, you become untouchable. That's the game. And it's a game most people are playing unconsciously. So ask yourself right now, where in your life are you trying to be loved when you should be respected? Where are you seeking approval when you should be enforcing boundaries? Those answers might change everything. Now let's flip the lens. Why do we fear more than we love? Why do we respond faster to a threat than to affection? It's because fear cuts deeper. It's wired into us through evolution. Fear kept our ancestors alive. Love built the tribe, but fear protected it. And even now, in relationships, in work, in society, fear is the invisible architect of behavior. You avoid saying what you really think because you fear rejection. You stay in the job you hate because you fear failure. You perform, conform, obey not because you found love, but because you fear loss. And that's the darker truth Machiavelli is pointing at. Fear is the foundation of control, and control is the structure of power. But here's the deeper question: is this how we should live? If fear is stronger than love, does that mean love is weak? Or does it mean we failed to understand love's real power? Because fear may build empires, but love builds meaning. Fear creates obedience, but love creates loyalty. Fear can shape behavior, but love can shape identity. And maybe that's what Machiavelli missed, or maybe he didn't. Maybe he knew that love is the higher path, but not the safer one. And in a world obsessed with survival, safety often wins. Which brings us to the most painful insight of all: we fear because we do not trust. And we do not trust because we do not love. So what would it take to reverse this? What would it take to build a world, or even just a life, where love guides more than fear? It would require a kind of courage most people never develop. The courage to be vulnerable. The courage to lose. The courage to love without needing to control. That's not soft. That's not weak. That's rare. And maybe, just maybe, that is the true revolution Machiavelli left unfinished. Because he showed us how the world works. But he also showed us what it costs. And now the question is yours: will you master fear or be mastered by it? Will you choose power or will you choose something deeper? How fear becomes a system, and why most people never escape it. Here's a thought that should stop you in your tracks. Fear isn't just a feeling. It's a system, a structure, a framework that quietly shapes your choices, your relationships, your beliefs, sometimes your entire identity. And the scariest part, it works best when you don't notice it. That's what Machiavelli saw, not just about rulers or kings, but about human nature itself. Fear doesn't need to scream. It doesn't need to show its face. It only needs to exist. A silent presence that whispers, "Don't speak up. Don't step out. Don't risk it." And slowly, almost invisibly, it wraps itself around you, not like a monster, but like a rulebook you didn't know you agreed to. Let's go deeper. Imagine a society where people are free. They can speak, vote, move, choose. But beneath all that freedom is a quiet fear of being judged, of losing status, of being shamed, canceled, exiled. So they comply. They self-censor. They adapt. Not because someone commands it, but because fear has already done its job. That's not authoritarianism. That's psychological architecture. Machiavelli understood this before modern psychology even had a name for it. He saw that if you want to control people, you don't always need violence. You just need predictable consequences. You need them to believe that stepping out of line will cost them something. And once they believe that, they'll police themselves. Now think about how this applies to your everyday life. Think about how many of your decisions are made from fear rather than freedom. How often do you avoid honesty to keep the peace? How often do you stay silent, not because you agree, but because you don't want the backlash? How often do you act not from your values, but from your survival instinct? And here's the twist: the more we do this, the more fear becomes normal. It becomes the water we swim in. We stop seeing it as fear. We start calling it being smart, being realistic, playing the game. But deep down, we know it's fear, dressed in logic. This is what Machiavelli meant when he said that fear is more reliable than love. Because love asks you to be brave, but fear only needs you to be cautious. Love is a risk. Fear is insurance. So in a world that glorifies control, which one do you think wins? Fear becomes the default. And once it's the default, it builds systems of education, systems of politics, even systems of belief. You're rewarded for compliance, punished for defiance. Not always overtly, sometimes subtly. And over time, you begin to confuse safety with truth. You begin to believe that the right thing is simply the least dangerous thing. And that's the moment fear has won. Let's get brutally honest. Why don't most people escape this system? Because fear offers a seductive trade, comfort in exchange for authenticity. It tells you that if you just play along, you'll be okay. You'll be liked. You'll be safe. And in a world that's constantly threatening your sense of worth through media, marketing, peer pressure, that offer sounds like salvation. But it's not. It's a trap. Because the more you live from fear, the more you abandon yourself. You say yes when you mean no. You nod when you feel resistance. You pretend to believe things you secretly question. And soon you don't even know who you are. You've become a role, a costume, a performance. That's why fear isn't just about control. It's about identity erosion. It makes you forget your voice. It makes you distrust your desires. And worst of all, it makes you think this is normal, that this is just what life is, that everyone's faking it, so you might as well fake it too. But Machiavelli would say, no, this isn't normal. This is strategy. This is how power structures maintain themselves, by making fear feel like common sense. And if you want to escape it, you have to see it. You have to name it. You have to ask, what am I really afraid of? And who benefits from that fear? Here's the mind-bending part. Fear doesn't just control the weak. It controls the powerful. Because those who rule by fear are also ruled by it. They fear losing control. They fear rebellion. They fear the very people they dominate. That's why tyranny is always paranoid. Why dictators always surround themselves with enemies and spies. Because fear may build empires, but it also curses them. And Machiavelli knew this. He wrote The Prince not to praise fear, but to expose its mechanics. He wanted us to understand that fear is useful, but also dangerous. It can preserve order, but it can also destroy the soul. And that's the razor's edge every leader walks, whether you're leading a nation or just leading your own life. So what's the way out? The answer isn't to destroy fear. That's impossible. The answer is to reorder it, and to stop letting it lead. To see it as a signal, not a master. Because fear can reveal what matters to you. It can point you toward your truth. But it should never decide for you. That's the paradox. Fear, when seen clearly, becomes a compass. But when hidden, it becomes a chain. So the first step is awareness. The second is courage. And the third, maybe the hardest, is integrity. The willingness to act in alignment with your values, even when it costs you. Especially when it costs you. This isn't about being reckless. It's about being real. It's about choosing love, not the soft, romantic kind, but the fierce, disciplined love that says, I will not betray myself to stay safe. That kind of love isn't weak. It's defiant. It's dangerous. And that's why systems built on fear will always try to crush it. Because love can't be controlled. Love doesn't obey. Love doesn't calculate risk, it tells the truth. And the truth is the one thing fear can't survive for long. So ask yourself right now, what truth am I avoiding because I'm afraid? And what would my life look like if I acted on it anyway? Machiavelli may have explained why fear wins, but he also hinted at why it ultimately fails. Because a life built on fear is not sustainable. It may last, but it will never thrive. It may control, but it will never inspire. And in the end, the people who change the world are not the ones who mastered fear, but the ones who transcended it. So the real question isn't just, what are you afraid of? It's, what would love do if it weren't afraid? The final duel, why real power only belongs to the one who masters both. Let's be clear, the game isn't about choosing fear or love. That's the illusion. The real challenge, the final duel, is to learn how to master both. Because fear without love becomes tyranny. But love without fear becomes naivety. If you lean too far in either direction, you lose control either of others or of yourself. That's what Machiavelli saw more clearly than almost anyone. Power isn't about emotion, it's about balance. And the one who masters both fear and love, who knows when to show strength and when to show mercy, that person becomes untouchable. Not because they dominate, but because they understand. We see this kind of mastery in rare individuals. The leader who commands respect without cruelty. The parent who disciplines with firmness but loves relentlessly. The friend who tells the uncomfortable truth because they care more about your growth than your approval. These people aren't driven by fear or love alone. They are anchored. They don't react, they respond. They don't manipulate, but they also don't tolerate manipulation. They are clear, decisive, and deeply human. And that's what makes them powerful, not because they control others, but because they refuse to be controlled by fear or sentimentality. They don't reject emotions, they govern them. So how do we become that kind of person? It starts with asking better questions. Not am I being too nice, or am I being too harsh? But am I being true? Because truth is the bridge between fear and love. It's what makes love strong enough to act and fear wise enough to pause. When you tell the truth, even when it costs you, you step into a deeper kind of authority, not the kind that rules others, but the kind that rules yourself. That's real sovereignty. That's the only power that lasts. And maybe that's what Machiavelli was pointing to all along. Not that fear is superior, but that unexamined love is weak. That love without boundaries becomes servitude. That power without compassion becomes rot. And that the most dangerous human being is not the one who is feared or loved, but the one who is free. Free to act from wisdom. Free to choose love with eyes wide open. Free to face fear and say, "You don't own me anymore."